Across the global landscape, bilingual programs have witnessed a surge in popularity, with content and language integrated learning, or CLIL, standing out as a prime example. However, there are challenges in the teaching and learning processes associated with CLIL. At the Appliable Linguistics and Language Education Symposium, we invited Dr Yiqi Liu from the Education University of Hong Kong. Her presentation is titled Translanguaging and Transknowledging Toward Critical and Inclusive CLIL in Plurilingual Settings. In it, she addresses learner diversity in CLIL and shares two stories from her research journey.
Before we delve into the details of the talk, I will begin my talk with some connotation about critical CLIL, because I think both critical and CLIL are some buzzwords in applied linguistics nowadays. And also, I'm going to talk about the issue of inclusive education, or how to address learner diversity in CLIL. And also, I'm going to share two stories in my research journey. So the first story is about the English medium gender education in Hong Kong secondary schools. And the second story is about teacher collaboration in early primary CLIL classrooms of learner diversity. And I hope to have dialogues and conversation about how to address relevant issues in CLIL. Firstly, as we have noticed, there have been numerous bilingual education programs, and bilingual education programs have become increasingly popular nowadays around the world. Content and language integrated learning, abbreviated as CLIL, is one example of such programs. For those of us new to the field of CLIL and bilingual education, CLIL is a dual-focused education program using an additional language to teach both the content and language. I think this is actualized in Hong Kong as English medium instruction. And in some European contexts, CLIL has perhaps been actualized as French medium instruction and other European languages. So different regions and different nations may have their own version of CLIL. And then research has indicated actually significant challenges in teaching and learning of CLIL. For those new to the CLIL area, we may already notice that actually CLIL sounds quite familiar or similar to some other programs such as EFL, English as a foreign language. So in this kind of program, the educational goal and outcomes would be more language driven. And we also have EAP, English for academic purposes, and also English for specific purposes, and also CLIL. So you can see that CLIL is situated pretty much in the middle of the language-driven goals and the content-driven goals of this continuum, and also content-based language teaching, immersion, and English medium instruction. So there are different models and different ways of teaching the content and language in the classrooms. And then some of the challenges will include, for example, the difficulties in learning through a less familiar language, while teachers may not have enough expertise or experience in teaching content area subjects in the second language. And the second, the other concerns would pertain to the availability of teaching resources, amount of teaching time, and also students' learning diversity, curriculum design, and classroom practices. For example, in a lot of projects that I conducted with the local school teachers, when we had meetings to discuss possible pedagogical innovation in either their English medium classrooms or extended learning activity time, when we look at the textbooks, you may find that on one hand, there will be a lack of scaffolding for the subject-specific literacy. For example, not many textbooks would really highlight the language features beyond the lexical levels and really enable the student to give an elaborate responses either verbally or through some multimodal drawing. So this is one major issue. And another is amount of teaching time, because in an internal service project at EDHK, we conducted a pedagogical collaboration with over 10 secondary schools in Hong Kong. Actually, they were very eager to develop extra resources for the students lagging behind in their English medium subjects. But actually, even though they have the good intention, many teachers complained that there was not enough teaching time. And on the other hand, their time at school is pretty much packed with all different kinds of tasks, including administrative tasks, right? So there was a lack of teaching time and also lesson planning time. And also students learning diversity. I think it has been well documented in the research literature. On one hand, outstanding students or above average students, they were very much prepared to do the English medium studies right at the beginning of their secondary school. But for those weaker students or struggling students, many teachers were complaining they were run out of ways to support them. I think this quote was not from my own research experience, but I think it has been well documented in the research literature. And then curriculum design, yes, the teachers are very eager to help and support the students, but there was a lack of principled and systematic way to plan the lessons and also conduct the lessons to provide both pre-planned scaffolding and spontaneous scaffolding. So curriculum design and also classroom practices. Some issues were identified. But however, notwithstanding challenges in CLIL, the use of everyday multimodal resources such as popular culture has been found useful in facilitating foreign language learning. So we see that actually when we allow multiple meaning-making resources to be used flexibly in the classroom, it will do a lot of good, not just in terms of pedagogical benefits, but also it can facilitate the students' learning motivation and engagement. And indeed, in the fields of applied linguistics and bilingual education, new theoretical approaches, including translanguaging and transsemioticing, have emerged to support the judicious use of multiple semiotic resources. Actually, I think in the last 2 decades, there are many research papers written on translanguaging in different schooling levels and in different national contexts. I think for those of us new to these theories and areas, I would like to take a moment to explain the gist of the theories. Translanguaging, here abbreviated as TL, was first coined in Welsh in 1994 to denote a bilingual pedagogical practice. For example, allowing multiple language varieties or meaning-making resources in the classroom. And translanguaging is a meaning-making process that goes not just between, but beyond the conventional language boundaries and systems. So I think this theoretical stance would really differentiate translanguaging from code switching, because the focus here is the holistic repertoire of the students and the language users. So we are not looking at the structural differences or whether this is L1, L2, or L3, but rather we are looking at the dynamics and the flow of meaning making. And so we are looking at what kinds of meaning making resources are being drawn upon, whether it's language or it's like gestures or body language or other physical objects in the immediate environment. So it's really moving beyond the boundaries. As we can see from the trans prefix, so it emphasizes its transcending capacity, and also it's a fluid, spontaneous, and dynamic process. Echoing with Halliday's notion of transsemiotic, for those of us interested in social semiotics, we know that actually social semiotics has its theoretical roots in the Halliday systemic functional linguistics. Echoing with Halliday's notion of transsemiotic, transsemioticing has been coined by Professor Angel Lin from the Department of English Language Education at EDHK to conceptualize plurilingualism. And then it refers to the well-coordinated, multisensory, whole-body nature of sense making. So it's not just about transcending language boundaries, but of course, I think translanguaging has already moved beyond transcending language boundaries and also looked at the coordination and interaction about different meaning-making resources. But here, transdemocratizing is going on to focus more on the coordination and the multisensory meaning-making resources and processes. So it refers to the examination of the verbal as well as the non-verbal semiotics. Semiotics here refer to the meaning-making resources, such as bodily movements, facial expressions, sounds, and color. And you can see that because of the advancement of technology nowadays, we are able to capture such rich and exciting dynamics in human interaction. Whereas I think decades ago, maybe at the very beginning of applied linguistic studies, the scholars were not so fortunate to be able to capture the rich dynamics. Firstly, translanguaging and transdemocratizing has been documented to provide pedagogical scaffolding for learning both content knowledge and academic language, and afford identity and culture affirmation. Because we know that behind the language of variety, there is culture and there is identity. And of course, language is a very important resource for constructing and reconstructing personas and identities. So actually, when certain meaning-making resources or a language of variety has been drawn upon in the classroom, it is affirming some kind of culture and some kind of identity. And the second important function is it has provided access to scientific discourse practices in an English or other language, dual language middle school, for example, in this study. And also it has the function of constituting a resource for joint negotiations of the scientific content in the science CLIL classrooms. And also it has facilitated dialoguing and knowledge co-construction in content-based education settings, as exemplified in these studies. And now one of the major recent developments in translanguaging and transdemocratizing studies is to move towards transknowledging, because previously when we have language as a noun, we suggest that actually we can look at the process of using language to mean, to know. And then we are actually turning knowledge from a certain set of information to a process. So here, transknowledging actually is about enabling diversity of meaning making by validating previously denigrated knowledge and ways of seeing, organizing, or relating to the world. So it has been argued that it is actually advocating epistemic justice as part of an agenda for social change. So maybe some of you would be wondering, why am I suddenly throwing out epistemic justice? It's because, for example, in the English medium classrooms, we often see the textbooks not only written in a second language. In many cases, in an EMI context, it would be English, but because no language would be politically neutral. So behind the description using another language, there would be a certain political stance or a certain viewpoint being portraying the knowledge and the so-called facts. So if we do not give a critical lens or enable our students to have a critical lens, some Anglocentric or perspectives or viewpoints that are more specific to a Western context would be perpetuated and accepted without any critical consideration. Whereas the knowledge of the global South or the students' everyday life or their home culture would be somehow depressed and silenced. So it's very important that while we are giving students access to knowledge and also an additional language in the EMI context, we're also giving voices to the students, to their culture, to their own ways of making knowledge. And actually, in order to understand the processes translanguaging and transsimultizing and also transknowledging, it would be very useful to draw upon the other latest developments in translanguaging, that is translanguaging as flows, as elaborated in Lemke and in 2022. So translanguaging as flows has drawn upon T-Board's 2011's distributed language view. Actually, we have languages. In this time, it's not a process, but a certain entity. So when we see it, it's the second-order language. The second-order language is a result of imposition and constraint on first-order languaging from historical, political, and institutional forces. That is, originally, as human beings, we would have the intuition to use all the resources that we know, that we have in our brain, to make sense of the world. But then somehow, suddenly we say, oh, this is language 1 and this is language 2. So this kind of differentiation is actually imposed by, for example, laws and policies. Here we say this is a kind of second-order language. So they are the cultural, institutional constructions on longer and slower time scale, because it takes a lot of time to have a certain policy, for example, language policy, right? And certain law regarding education and language use. And then we have languaging. So here we have language as a certain process, right? So this is first-order languaging as the intrinsic expressivity and interactivity of human bodies in interaction. So usually the first order languaging is dialogic, involving different voices and dialogues. You have your own little inner voice and you have conversation with the outside world, others' voices, and also the laws and policies, right? And also it's whole body sense making. According to this theoretical perspective, translanguaging is not a purely individual phenomenon. So it has a material history with flows of material, energy, information, and with other people in the community. So if we look at the process of knowledge making and sense making, not only from our individual or people's point of view, you will see that actually whenever we make meaning with languages, there is a history behind it. And also there is objective condition that enables such a meaning-making process. So for example, a student may like to use a very colloquial way of expression in the classroom. So the reason why this student has this preference will have its link or root in their own family or in a certain community. If we take a step back, we can find that actually there is a history and there is objectivity and there is certain flow of material and energy behind the whole process. If we do not take a human-centric view, then we can see that if we take an alternative view to it, we can see that actually the individuals, the people, you and me together at this moment, we are the meeting point of flows of the community and the past and present. Just take a very everyday example. The reason why we can have this hybrid mode at this moment and why we use Zoom as a platform for dialoguing and having academic exchanges, I think it has a history too with our COVID, where we had a lot of teaching and learning conducted via Zoom. Actually, the ways of living and also our human body can be seen as the meeting points of different energy, of different resources, and of different histories. If we take a closer look into the recent research trends in CLIL, for example, we can actually see that currently CLIL research has been characterized by two major theoretical positions. So firstly, we have the second language acquisition tradition. I think in this research area, there are numerous and fruitful studies and research findings by colleagues in Hong Kong and also overseas. And then we also have the social cultural theories, discourse analysis, and both of which stem from applied linguistics. But what is lesser explored would be the critical approach. With the critical approach, that is recognizing how CLIL is continually discursively constructed and remains a perpetual site of struggle. So this critical approach is self-explored. And of course, I understand that there are three major traditions to criticality. When we first talk about critical, people would think that, oh, it's criticizing or it's differentiating the good from the bad. But actually, this is only emphasizing the first approach of criticality, which refers to focusing on the openness of the text meaning and looking at the truth or false value of certain statement or certain facts. So this is the first approach to criticality. But there are other approaches, for example, looking at or interpreting the human interaction in relation to the social context. So this is the second interpretive approach. And the third approach is the emancipative approach, that is focusing on social inequality and also focusing on examining the power dynamics in human interaction. When I suggest for a critical approach or critical CLIL, I'm focusing on examining the discursive construction of social inequality and the issues of inequality in the education context. But if we zoom into the critical CLIL approach, amid the emerging critical research in CLIL, much has been discussed in terms of, for example, enactment of language ideologies and also issues of identities, values, and perceptions, so certain ways of looking at certain identities and languages. However, what remains lesser known is how to raise CLIL students' critical awareness about the hierarchy of other structures of domination inherent in the CLIL curriculum, while providing access to the dominant language varieties of languages and registers. Another research gap in CLIL would be we have got fruitful research studies in the secondary education context, but then leaving other educational contexts less explored. And also there is another research gap, that is the attention to the issue of learner diversity. We can see that if you take a look around the world, you can find that attention to learner diversity is an indispensable feature of any education system based on black and white policies. And learner diversity is an inherent human condition from diversity in prior ideas, experiences, knowledge, attitudes, different learning styles, and multiple intelligences to social cultural disadvantage, health restrictions, intellectual capacities. Sometimes we have especially gifted students, whereas we have students with special educational needs, special language requirements, disabilities, or serious personality disorders. And pity to see that actually research into catering to diversity within the CLIL programs is still very much at infancy. Because if we look at the existing literature, we can find that it seems to be still focusing on perfectly able-bodied and also relatively good intellectual capacities, right? Because if you look at the context of Hong Kong, in order to get into the English medium instruction programs, students have to attain relatively higher scores in some kind of assessments. So we are really looking at advantaged or more fortunate students. But how about the rest? For those who are struggling with paying close attention in the classrooms, and how about those with other physical challenges? Because CLIL on the outset is to promote equality, equal access to language. But actually, when we implement CLIL, we are leaving behind quite a major population of the students. So it's an issue that worth further exploration. So exploration of CLIL in primary settings and learning environments with students of diverse needs is much warranted. Given the documented affordances of translanguaging and transsemiotising, the following two case studies explore translanguaging and transsemiotising as ways of furthering the critical and inclusive education in CLIL programs. In this case study, translanguaging and transthematicing has been drawn upon as pedagogy to scaffold the students' development in both the content area. So in this case, it is gender education and also the subject-specific literacy for translanguaging for doing gender in English medium classrooms in Hong Kong. If we look at gendered discourses in education, you can find that, for example, it's been usually seen as a biological category. And sometimes the term sex and gender would be seen as relatively the same in some curriculum documents. But in my study and also in the pedagogical intervention, when I discuss with the teachers, we would like to promote a more fluid view towards gender. And also in the study, I frame gender as product of social interaction, as well as a kind of resources that interlocutors creatively draw upon to perform different aspects of their social identities in the classroom context. So gender discourse can be considered on two interrelated micro and macro levels, including the interactional styles and also the social practices. If we zoom into our education field, we can see that the division of gender roles somehow is reconstructed in teaching and learning school subjects. And in addition to textual or visual underrepresentation of females in the textbooks, binary, monolithic positioning about masculinity and femininity is still embodied in the everyday classroom interaction. Gender issues are not given due attention in Hong Kong, as it has been advocated by Choi 2012, and opportunities for students to discuss gender at school are rare, meaning that open dialogue about gender and gender identity may be stunted. So although translanguaging is considered conducive to CLIL, existing studies mainly focus on disciplinary literacy or critical language awareness. Little is explored about systemic translanguaging and transthematicing or transregistering pedagogy for enhancing critical gender awareness. So I want to see whether it works in the Hong Kong classrooms and how it works. So in my study, I raised two research questions. So the first is, what and how are the gendered discourses constructed in the CLIL classroom interaction and using the MEC framework. So this is a pedagogical framework for designing the curriculum in the unit of work. And also, what is the impact of the translanguaging pedagogy exemplified by the MEC framework in students' development of critical gender awareness? Basically, this is a design-based ethnographic case study. So I worked with over 200 Hong Kong Secondary 4 students and 4 liberal studies teachers in an English medium secondary school several years ago. So we still had liberal studies. The participants were the teachers, 2 teachers here. We had teacher collaboration with the university researcher, so in this case, that is me. And also, we would like to design a new gender stereotypes unit based on the multimodalities in textualization cycle, MEC cycle. So this pedagogical framework allows translanguaging and opens up the space for transthematicing in the classroom. So we used this framework for designing the pedagogical innovation for integrating multimodal and multilingual scaffolding for CLIL. And we had some classroom observation and student interviews. And we find that actually somehow there was still binary construction of gender, because I think the kinds of gender discourses were constructed not only by the students and the teachers involved, but also the classroom was actually situated in the broader curriculum context in which sometimes gender is considered on binary poles, okay? It's a factor, males and females, rather than seeing, oh, actually, we can have alternative masculinities and femininities. And also, we have seen co-construction of masculinities. And in my study, if you're interested, you can take a look at the data and the discourse analysis there. Because of the translanguaging and also transthematicing space, created by the teacher in the classroom, there are different kinds of perceptions and also categorizations of men and women. So in this case, we have the construction of real men who are true to their very traditional gender values, and we have good men, and we have the so-called gay men, okay? We also have the traditional and alternative gender values reconstructed in the interviews afterward. Of course, you can say, oh, you still have the traditional gender values into the interviews. But of course, individuals are just the meeting points of different histories. We cannot expect to change everything in one night. It's impossible. The change would be gradual, but at least we see alternative discourses, alternative practice, alternative identities being constructed and gradually emerging from the whole process. And the second story is spontaneous teacher collaboration in teaching early primary CLIL classrooms of learner diversity. This is still being reviewed by one of the international journals, but I would like to share some of the major findings here. Because as we can see in the literature, when we talk about teacher collaboration, we always focus on the well-planned in the short term, in the midterm, in the long term, what we can do. So we have got a rich research findings, a lot of empirical studies, and a lot of guidelines on this. But I think what is less noticed is about the spontaneous teacher collaboration. And to be honest, in the collaboration with the teachers, we did have well-planned teacher collaboration, by which I mean all kinds of lesson planning meetings, all kinds of formal documents that we put up together, and also the different worksheets. We did the study for 2 years. I actually spent 2 years in 3 primary schools in Hong Kong using the MEC framework as a way to facilitate the students' engagement in the CLIL classrooms. When we talk about CLIL classrooms here, we do not mean that the 3 primary schools that we worked with are actually English medium primary schools, but quite on the contrary, we are doing this pedagogical innovation in some special lesson time in the semesters. So we had a lot of opportunities to explore various collaboration. So we had 2 government-aided primary schools located in working class neighborhoods in Hong Kong, 2 classes in each grade. So the pupils were all beginners in learning English. So they had diverse prior English language knowledge about the units, demonstrated by the pre-test results examining existing knowledge about the key vocabulary of the units, and also the target sentence patterns for information reports. Because in our project, we use the process genre approach to facilitating students' development of English literacy. So basically, we focus on the descriptive text type or descriptive genre, the information report, and the post-test was conducted via a writing task of the information report genre at the end of each unit, where the target language features in the pretext were supposed to be used. And also we can see in the classes different ethnicity and also different social backgrounds, and also there were SEN students in the classroom. So to cater for the potential needs of pupils of dyslexia, and also we have new arrival students, so the teachers involved decided to employ flexible, multilingual, and also multisensory pedagogy. So the MEC framework was introduced to teachers in a professional sharing workshop as a heuristic tool, and also the English and GS teachers, general studies teachers, and also the school's head of curriculum development sat down together with the university team. We did some curriculum mapping between the English and the subjects, and also explored ways of using the MEC framework. You can take a look at some of the stages and activities as School A. We use the MEC framework as the heuristic tool, and this is School B. We can see that the classroom-based teacher collaboration for addressing learner diversity in CLIL illustrate a series of fluid translanguaging and transthematicizing practices in training multiple meaning-making resources. So the spontaneous teacher collaboration practices include, firstly, collaborating and engaging students in co-constructing the thematic patterns in the target academic genre. So I would like to take a moment to switch to another screen you can see that, oh, actually they are just standing in different parts of the classrooms, but actually what they are doing would come down together to a very intricate and very interesting process of constructing thematic patterns of the knowledge. In this moment, the teachers wanted to teach the differentiation between paws and hand when they taught the different animal terms in this unit. And you can see that if we examine the whole interaction process, we can come up to see that, oh, actually they are going back and forth in co-constructing the thematic patterns, that is the knowledge about animal body parts, and also very strategically integrated the teaching of subject-specific sentence patterns, that is the language of description and also language of definition, which later were transthematized into the students' writing. When we looked at students' writing in the post-test, we can also see that these language features were used and drawn upon by the students. In this case, Anna and this student had some challenges in reading and writing. So previously, if we take a look at her writing, you could see that she did not really command the conventions of written English. For example, no space between words. And in other assignment samples by this student, we could also see mirroring of certain written letters. At first, the student, although she was very young, only in P1, she was a little bit embarrassed because she could not really write English very well, and sometimes she could not read very well in front of the whole classroom. So at first, she did not want to participate in the drama activity. The native English teacher and CLIL teacher helped her with all kinds of resources, with body language, with hand gestures, and a lot of different scaffolding practices in the process. She overcame the hurdle and completed the reading aloud task. At the end of P1, we could see that she did a much better written work. And in this case, she also drew a very cute and lovely picture with happy faces of the animals. I think it can somehow reflect the positive mindset and also attitude she had towards learning English. What I would like to suggest is that actually through collaborating in engaging students in constructing the thematic patterns, and also the teachers would need some disciplining spaces in classroom contingencies, and also using translanguaging and transthematizing as a means of knowledge brokering and foregrounding their achievements, we could see a lot of encouraging results in our teaching and learning. Some implications. I think, firstly, although these are just like case studies, but it has given us some opportunities to see the potentials of translanguaging and transthematizing for CLIL. Firstly is the non-coercive rearrangement of desires and also views and attitudes in the trans space. Because when we look at the first case in which we had the English medium gender education, so it would take the teachers and also the students a lot of time to have transformation in their identity and gender values. So that if we want to have the opportunity to enable the change, we need to create spaces, non-coercive spaces. And the second implication is that actually translanguaging and the opportunities of transknowledging, that is allowing the students' own voices and their own culture to be acknowledged and drawn upon in the classroom is very important because it can empower both the CLIL teachers and the students. And also this empowerment process would take some well-planned systemic ways of doing things. And also we cannot ignore the spontaneous and dynamic resources. And the third implication is that critical CLIL, when we talk about critical CLIL, we still most focus on, for example, racial linguistic ideologies. But I think perhaps it's time for us to also look at ways and also the difficulties or the struggles of the students of diverse learning needs, and also take inclusive education into the range of critical CLIL, and also encourage compassion for the underrepresented and marginalized. So this is what I would like to share with everyone. So thank you very much.